effect and implementation has started. So what are the things we have to keep in mind? What are the things we should take care of? All these things are very important because we are all dealing with public data, private data, and all. So how do we manage the data? How do you deal with the data is something which we need to understand as per the new act and new regulations. So that is the reason why we have organized this. I thank my team for organizing this. Sangeeta, anything you would like to add to this? So I hand over to Sangeeta, who she is the one who has taken initiative to organize this. Over to you, Sangeeta.
Okay, sir. Thank you for that introduction note, sir. So there is some change in the DPDP compliance, which is why we are holding this webinar. And as you know, this has to be a responsible data handling thing. And what are the compliances that we need to do so as to avoid the penalties, whatever there is. It is as huge as 250 crores. That is what I read in the brief. So let us hear about that, what we can do, how we can handle it. And there is a grievance redressal system has to happen. That is what I understand. I'll request Mr. Puskal Dubey to kindly throw light on that as well. And I hand over the stage to you, Puskal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sangeeta.
Yeah.
Yes, I just checked. I can share my screen. Um, Please let me know if my screen is visible.
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay. So, hi everyone. Here, the agenda of the session is to discuss the impact of the DPDP rules on MFIs with the goal in mind. And the goal is how do we get started, right? So, by the end of this webinar, we want to leave you with some level of clarity about how you can get started and what is exactly your compliance obligations under the rules and also the DPDP Act, right? So, how we will structure, I'm Pushkal. I head consent in at Legality. I am an ex-privacy lawyer. I used to work at Trilegal, and I've advised on global privacy regulations as well as the Indian Act when it was a bill. And I'm also a product manager. I've been building compliance products in the BFSI space for the last 5 years. So that's about me. Before we dive into the rules, I just want to touch upon the structure of today's presentation. So the way we will go about today's presentation is that I will first walk you through what changes with the final rules. That is the event that has happened that Sangeeta was talking about. That is the latest update. So we will start with what has changed with the final rules. Then we will take a step back and look at what are your compliance obligations under the Act as a whole. Right. I will try to keep this session restricted to 15 minutes. So hopefully we can end by part by 3:20. And then I'll take questions after that for any clarifications that we can give. Of course, a legal person, your in-house legal teams, etc., will be the best to give you these advice. But we will try our best to give you whatever understanding we have based on the law and based on market practices. So while I'm talking, feel free to leave your questions in the chat, and I'll try to go over the chat and see if there are any questions there during the question answering session. After we are done with this broad impact, we will discuss how to get started. We will look at the various steps that go into getting started. And I will also use consent in products to demonstrate how your compliance journey will look like. And of course, where a tool like consenting can help you. So this is broadly the structure of the presentation. First, we'll talk about your compliance obligations, and then we will look at how to get started. And within how to get started, we will look at some specific things uh, and look at demos as well. If you have any questions, please keep putting them in chat. So to get started, the key requirements under the DPDP rules broadly are listed out on your screen. They cover, elements of a valid consent notice. It covers obligation and registration of consent managers, retention for specific purposes, reasonable security practices, provisions relating to personal data breach, additional provisions that apply over and above your RBI requirements. Verifiable consent for processing children's data. This was a key part that was clarified in the final rules as well. And obligations of the significant data fiduciary. There has been some clarity, but we don't know who the significant data fiduciary is. And roles and powers of the board. So broadly, the rules can be broken down into these lists. Now, at the end of the day, what does this update do? The latest, earlier there was a draft rules that was passed in the beginning of the year, and now the final rules have come. Now, what changes? The main thing that changes with the final rules is that we now have clear timelines, right? So there is an 18-month timeline that is given for data fiduciaries to start complying with their obligations under the Act. There is a 1-year timeline that is given for consent managers, and there is and the provisions relating to the data protection board also come into force. Separately, there's another timeline that has been mentioned, which is the 90-day timeline for a TAT response, right? For a grievance addressal response, there's a 90-day TAT that has been prescribed for it, which was earlier missing from the rules. But yeah, the key takeaway is this 18-month timeline. Your clock has started ticking for compliance, and now is the time when implementation has to start. That is the key timeline that has come out of this. And now, uh, uh, consent and notice requirements, some consent and notice requirements are there under the final rules, and this impacts, your client onboarding practices, such as your loan applications, your loan origination flows are impacted by that, and you need to change your consent flows. There is also requirements for collecting parental or guardian consent for children and people with disability. So if in your lending flows there are children involved or people with disability involved, you need to collect verifiable guardian consent or verifiable parental consent in those flows, and you need to be able to verify the age and identity of the person who's claiming to be the parent or the guardian. So for this, this is the key thing that has changed under the rules. There are some smaller aspects that have changed, but I will skip over those and want to look at the big picture stuff right now. We will go into the smaller aspects based on your question. One key thing that has changed, of course, that has been added, of course, is for significant data fiduciaries. Now, we don't know who significant data fiduciaries are going to be. The central government is yet to come out with a list, but informally, we know that from several, quotes from the ministry, we know that it is going to be regulated entity. So if you're a regulated entity, then you're likely going to be a significant data fiduciary. And for significant data fiduciary under these rules, there is a requirement to just increase scope of due diligence. Earlier, this was restricted to algorithmic processing. Now it extends to all technical measures that are being used by the significant data fiduciaries. So these are very specific things. We can now take a step back and actually look at your compliance obligations in a broader sense. So I'm just going to change my uh, view. So, in a broader sense, what are your compliance obligations? Your compliance obligations are to collect consent, and here you have to collect consent for specific purposes for which you're going to process the data, and you need to collect consent in a affirmative action. So, it needs to be specific to the purpose, and there should be affirmative action. This consent must be verifiable, so you need to create auditable logs of each consent update. You also need to give an interface to the end user to be able to update their consent, right? Now, a key governance part that has been introduced under this law is that withdrawal of consent has been made very easy. There were some broad requirements to withdraw consent earlier, but now in under the DPDP Act, these requirements have become very specific. And most importantly, how they affect your sharing of information is key, because now you are required to ensure that you are sharing data with an application that is going to use it for a purpose where you have the user consent, right? So, for example, if the user is not consenting to WhatsApp messages, you cannot share it with your WhatsApp service providers. You cannot share the data with your WhatsApp service provider. And if the user comes back and they withdraw their consent for promotions, marketing, and promotions, then you must get your service provider to stop sending those communications. This applies to WhatsApp, email, SMS, even your feet on street sales agents or agents who are on the field. They should be able to they should be able to provide this withdrawal of consent facility to the end user, and they should also ensure that products are sold to them based on their consent, right? So this is a key change that has happened, which gives control in the hands of the customer and of the end user of the data principle under the act. And this is what requires consent-based governance to be brought into your processes, right? What has also come in is user rights. So I think Sangeeta mentioned that in the beginning of the presentation about how we should touch upon grievance addressal as well. So now users have rights, and these rights include grievance addressal, but they also have rights to erasure, which means that if you don't have a legal sort of regulatory obligation to keep the data, I as a user can come and demand erasure for that data. Now, in many cases in the BFSI context, of course, erasure is governed by retention requirements, loan agreements, KYC records, credit reports. All of these have to be maintained for a certain period of time based on the account-based relationship. So those retention requirements, of course, take precedence in these cases. But if there is no legal requirement to keep some data, such as some basic demographic detail in some application that is not being used for archiving or record keeping, then you must delete that. Yeah, then you must delete the data. Was there a question?
No, Pushpa. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Um, right. So now uh, we go over some more changes. Personal data breach. So earlier your requirements were to report to RBI and to certain about the personal data breaches. Now you also have to notify the data protection board, and very importantly, under the DPDP Act, you also have to notify your customers about any breach that happens. And there's a 72-hour window to notify the data protection board as well as your end customers. So now this becomes an add-on sort of obligation. If a personal data breach happens, you need to have the workflows for that in place well beforehand, and you need to have a detailed sort of breach reporting mechanism and breach reporting templates and all of that prepared already, and like a response plan prepared already for your audits. Data retention, I touched upon this already. You need to retain data retain some data, and the rest of the data you need to delete it based on the customer's consent. What data do you have to retain? Any data that you're required to process as per a legal obligation or an ongoing dispute or for collections purposes. There are specific exceptions for these, but all other data that doesn't fall under these exceptions or doesn't fall under retention requirements and is being used in applications that are using it for a purpose that may have expired, for purpose for which you may not have any basis to use the data anymore, there you have to delete the data. For example, I gave an example of a marketing application, or for your credit modeling, for example, if you're using personal data, you should ensure that it is anonymized after a period of time, and you should not reach out to the customer if they do not have a relationship with you or if they've asked for erasure. Children's and data for persons with disability, I touched upon earlier as well. You need to ensure that for any person with disability or for any child, you're collecting consent from their parent or guardian, and you need to be able to verify the age and identity of the parent or guardian as well. One point that is not here, that also I would like to talk about, is the need for conducting is the requirement specific to significant data fiduciaries. So now significant data fiduciaries need to exercise a lot of due diligence in all of their technical processes, and which means that, and you also have to do DPIAs, which means that you need to have a thorough assessment and audit mechanism in place where all the processing activities that are going on within your organization, you're doing documented privacy assessments of those processes, and you need to resolve any risks that are identified in these assessments and audits and make sure that they're done periodically for upkeep. So this is requirement that specifically applies to significant data fiduciaries. Since we discussed that RBI might that regulated entities might become significant data fiduciaries, this is something else that would be relevant for this audience. So here I'm going to take a pause. I'll go over the questions uh, in the chat, and if there are no more questions, we will move on to the second part of this session. So I see one question. Right. So this is a great question that has been asked about consent managers, and how consent managers and data fiduciaries will work together to collect and manage consent, and how does interoperability work in this framework? So consent managers that are specified under the rules point towards these are specifically identified entities that can be used by data principals to provide their consents. These are specifically registered entities. The registration requirements for these entities um, is out under the rules, but we right now don't have any entity that has been registered as a consent manager under these rules. We do have entities that act like consent managers outside the scope of these rules. For example, if you look at RBI, within RBI you have an account aggregator that is used to share uh, financial statements and other GST records and all of that with the user's consent to information users. These information users can be lenders and brokers and banks, and all of that. So these account aggregators are an example of a consent manager. How else, how will interoperability work with consent managers? That is something that we don't have clarity on. Again, we know in the AA context that in the account aggregator context, there is a industry body called Sehmati, and there is also Rebit that is set up by the RBI, which is the IT standards part of RBI. They are responsible in governing the API standards, and the uh, interoperability between account aggregators, but there is no such thing that has been put in place for consent managers. So the long story short, we are still waiting for more and more clarity, and we're still waiting on seeing how this regime evolves. Tools that are providing consent management abilities are different from consent managers, because they are consent managers are identified separately as having separate relationship with the principal, whereas these tools, like for example, Consentin is just a solutions provider to fiduciaries. So, could you please share the guidelines outlined in the DPDP? Yeah, we can share this presentation after this is done. These are all the questions that I saw in the chat. Since there are no more questions, I will move on from this session into the second part of the session. In this part, I will talk about how do you get started, like how do you start complying with the DPDP Act, and just one second. So yeah, after in this session, I will show you what can be done as a first step of getting started. And then I will also show you some demonstrations of what I'm talking about, of these requirements that I'm talking about, how you can achieve them using consent in. And after each demo, I'll look in the chat for questions, same format. And if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, and I'll answer that at the end of each section. So let's talk about getting started. Getting how so When we talk about getting started, we need to have first start with a clear idea of the goal. What do we need to achieve? Right now, usually gap assessment reports and all these requirements, they'll give you a list of 1,000 things, but that doesn't really help you understand, like give you a clear intuition of exactly what it is that you have to achieve. So, DPDP Act, in order to understand the goal of what you need to achieve, is simply a Consumer Protection Act. The goal of this act is to bring in trust, transparency, and control. Right? That is the goal of this act. Trust, uh, the end user, the customers, the data principals, they should be able to trust a business with their data. The business should take all the steps necessary to ensure that their data is not breached or nobody gets unauthorized access to their data. So they need to ensure reasonable security safeguards. That's what it means to for a end user to have trust in a fiduciary or a business when they give them data. What the second part is transparency. Transparency simply means Transparency simply means that you should be able to notify, give notice to the end user, the customer, the data principal about exactly how you're going to process their data, right? In the DPDP context, the notice requires vernacular languages. It must be plain and simple. It should be presented separately. It should be downloadable. You should tell the specific purposes for which you're collecting data. You should list out the specific data categories that you're collecting. You should specify how a user can exercise their rights, give them links for that, give them links for updating their consent, and give them a way to raise a complaint to the board. Right. So all the processing that is done based on consent, you should show people a notice and give them a clear sort of understanding of what you're processing their data for. Furthermore, um, if any of your current customers want, they should be able to come to you with a right to access request, right? So right to access is a right that is given for a data principal, a customer. As part of this request, they should be able to ask you what all data you're processing about them, what are the third parties with which whom you've shared the data, and what all processing activities are you doing on their data. So you should be able to provide all of this information very clearly to any data principal upon their request and after verifying their identity and all of that. But this is another example of transparency that you have to bring into your personal data processing, how you process personal data. And the third part of it is, of course, control. Control means consent. So you have to give them granular control over how they want their data to be processed. Sometimes, for example, with KYC and credit checks, etc., or fraud check, it is not possible for you to give them the service, to give them a loan, for example, or give them a financial service if they don't give their consent for these. So these purposes become mandatory. But other purposes such as cross-selling, upselling, promotions, marketing, you should be able to give people granular control about how their data should be processed, which means people should be able to provide their consent. People should be able to withdraw their consent. And if somebody has withdrawn their consent, you should be able to ensure that the third parties that you're using to process that data delete that data, or that data is archived, or it is used only for like legal and regulatory purposes. So that is what it means to have control, right? Before I take a pause, I'll just show you a few quick examples of what this process looks like in a couple of onboarding journeys. So one example is our website. So in this website, you can download this compliance checklist after providing some of your details. If I provide these details, I can download this checklist. But before I download the checklist, I get this notice. Now, under this notice, I'm told about how my data is going to be processed, what all data categories are going to be processed, and I'm given told how I can update my consent. This notice is available in vernacular languages. This can be branding, and you can download it. You can accept and reject the purposes. But after I've accepted it, then I can proceed in my journey. In this case, it just means I download the compliance checklist, but it can mean um, in a typical lending flow, it means that you go to the next step in the LOS application. So if I want, I can also manage my privacy. So I can say that I can withdraw my consent for event invitations, and I can save my preferences. You will notice that these colors are slightly different from the colors that you see. That's because you can customize these preferences, like your brand colors and all can be customized. I can also raise a request. So earlier I was talking about an access request. I can raise that access request with legality and for uh, details, uh, ask them for details about what's happening with my data. And I can also raise a um, an erasure request, let's say. So these sort of interfaces, right now you're looking at it as a web interface. This interface can be provided on an LOS. It can be provided on any agent application. It can be provided at a CRM that is running at a branch level. Right now you're looking at a pop-up. You can also provide an entire web page. You can also provide an authenticated pop-up where the user logs in with an OTP. You can also trigger IVR calls to your customers to collect their affirmative consent for specific purposes. And these IVR calls can also be vernacular languages. So the requirement to collect consent for specific purposes with an affirmative act and the consent and the notice should be presented independently. That requirement, and you should be able to maintain a verifiable record of it. This requirement can, you need to fulfill, we help you fulfill this requirement fully, and you need to fulfill this requirement fully, but then the channel can be anything, right? The channel can be your agent application, loan origination application, your IVR branch CRM that is running at the branch level. Of course, it can be done for using WhatsApp and web and app flows, but these other flows might be more relevant to this audience. I'll show you another example. So this is a CASA journey, not a lending journey, but let's say I fill in my details here and like think of it as a branch application. Then this consent pop-up can pop up here again, similar consent pop-up, and I can provide my consent and then move on in the journey to upload my PAN, Aadhaar, and take my selfie and move on to e-sign. So I will not go into e-sign right now, but this is how it fits in into a typical CASA journey, right? For MFI, I've created an example, a sample notice here. So here, an MFI journey will also look something like this, where you're at the back end. We'll dive more into this, but at the back end, your mapping will look something like this, right? And this is the key sort of thing that you need to arrive at internally, the data mapping, in order to be able to achieve this. So, just to take a step back before I stop for questions, we started with understanding the goal, right? What is the goal? The goal is to provide transparency and control to the end user. Then we saw examples of how this works with the consent notices. And now we are going to work backwards into what we need to do to be able to achieve something like this. But before I do that, uh, I'll just go. There's one more question. For entities like us, MFIs, where client onboarding data collection is done through physical forms manually and not digitally, how do we ensure verifiable notice consent? Is it supposed to be done through the specific field mentioned in the form itself? So thank you for that question. I will actually walk you through something that we have prepared on this question. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, it is visible.
So since you mentioned physical flows, first I want to start off by talking about the risks in physical flows, right? So when you are collecting consent on a paper, but the consent is supposed to govern all digital processes, you need to ensure that this consent is digitized as soon as possible, right? Now, there may be an idea that, okay, let's take the entire onboarding is happening on paper, so let's take the consent also on paper so that we can save costs, save time, and ensure that there's no added step. But this is not great because, firstly, when you're sharing, let's say if you share you put the consent on the account opening form, you and the way it happens right now, and you scan the account opening form, you're sharing a lot of PII just to be able to record that consent, right? And you're storing a lot of PII to record that consent. Also, that consent doesn't help you a lot in governance because it is on paper, right? But let's say you can create a separate document on which consent is collected, and on that document you only put the CRF number and no other details, and then you scan that. But any scanning will rely on OCR. And OCR, let's say the best OCR has a 95% probability of success. There is a 5% error rate, let's say. And that is the size of your risk because you are entering into like a 5% risk for all the scanning and consent upload that you're doing, because your consent records are not being created in a proper way, and it creates possibility where some processing may be done against the user's consent. So there is that risk that you're incurring. Also, purely in terms of costs, if you're scanning individual copies, let's say each scan is 200 KB, when that scales across lakhs of customers, that becomes a lot of storage. And consent is the first step in any journey, which you must have seen. So you'll be collecting a lot of consents, and you can't keep scanned copies of all of those consents. The storage costs become very high. So then what do you do, right? The and that this is something that I touched upon earlier. I'll just cover this here. There are many other solutions. You can use upload of scans as a fallback last resort where none of them work, but you need to minimize your risks and your costs, right? So what are the other solutions? Firstly, if your customer is physically present, we have an OTP flow where the customer can just provide an OTP. So even if they have a feature phone, they can provide an OTP to the agent and give their consent on the agent application using the OTP, right? So that this ensures that the consent is digital at source. Let's say there is no agent application, right? So let's say you take a form and you later digitize it. As soon as you digitize it, you can also trigger an IVR call to this customer, and the customer can provide their consent using the IVR call, right? You can also, of course, for the urban customers, you can also share a WhatsApp link with them, right? Or an email link or something like that. But IVR works very well for feature phones in remote areas, right? So you can collect their consent over IVRs. So in the worst, like it is a really worst case scenario to be collecting consent on physical forms. But these OTP and IVR, these solutions are available to be able to collect consent in remote locations. So that was um, quickly answering that question. I think the second question is also similar. What are some of the practices for handling, storing, and disposing of the original physical documents? That will depend on your document retention and storage policies. The consent is only consent for processing of personal data, and the rest of it is governed by RBI norms for the application form itself. So next, I will come back. I don't see any more questions. If there are any more questions from the things that I've spoken about earlier, you can also put them in the chat. And if there are no more questions, even from a previous session, you can put them in the previous section. You can put those questions in the chat, and I'll come back to them. For now, I will move along with the presentation. So we saw what a consent journey looks like, right? We were talking about what we need to achieve in terms of transparency and control. We looked at a notice, but how does all of this come together, right? So now all of this comes together in this data mapping, right? So this is where we paused earlier, where I had created a profile for an MFI flow, like a very simple profile. This can get very, very complex very, very quickly. So I've just created a very simple profile right now. So if you see here, there's for customer onboarding, let's say you're doing KYC, credit, and fraud check, and you're using all of these systems, and with these systems, you're sharing all of these data categories, right? I can also edit this a little bit. Let's say I want to, these purposes can be as granular as you want. So let's say I want to add email, phone, WhatsApp marketing purpose. WhatsApp marketing. I can add that purpose. I can select the ground for processing and tell the purpose duration and any revocation alert. You will not be able to learn about our offers on WhatsApp. I can define if this purpose is mandatory and add this purpose, right? So now I've added a separate purpose for WhatsApp marketing, and there is a revocation alert for it. I can add processing activities here. So I can add, I'm doing, my upselling and cross-selling with WhatsApp marketing. And let's say I'm using, any system. So I will, HubSpot already exists, but let's say for cross-selling, I'm using a new system. So I will add a new system, let's say internal WhatsApp gateway, and I will enter I will say it's an internal system, and I will provide the name of the system admin, their email, any internal spock. Uh, that is, in case of third-party systems, you can enter internal spock and vendors and the usage region for the system. So I've added the system, and now I can mention, what all data categories are being shared with the system. So again, I'm just doing like a sample sort of a mapping flow, but with you, this can get very detailed, and we'll talk about how to manage that complexity, right? At the fundamental level, you need to understand what data sits in what systems, and what systems are being used for what activities, and what activities are being done under which purpose. So this essential data mapping you need to have in place. And you can here are some further configurations. I will skip them, and this is what the notice looks like. So within the notice, you can add your links, right? So let's say you want to let's say here I want to add a privacy policy. You can learn about our data protection practices reading. So I've added this new text. I want to add a privacy policy here, right? And I've changed my text. So I need to save this, and then I can translate this across many languages. So these are all the local languages on which you want to on which you can perform your operations. So let's say after verifying my English translation, I can then initiate auto translations or expert translations across all these languages for the more commonly known languages. You can use AI translations, but for your more lesser known languages, more rare languages, we you can also use expert translation. Sorry about that. So all this translation can be done, and finally you go ahead and save your profile. So I'm just going to proceed anyway, and now this is what your profile looks like. Now the question becomes, how do we find out all of this information? Like right now, you may not have a complete idea of what data is being used in what systems, and it is being used in what and what are the. You may not understand this whole process, and that is where you can start off with using data discovery, right? So data discovery is uh, nothing but it is a process where you can find out what all personal data is being uh, stored in your internal systems or in your third party systems. Your internal systems can be, your structured application databases, but it can also be your drives and, your file stores where you may have unstructured data like scans of Aadhaar and all of that. So you can also have endpoints. So, for example, agent devices where personal data is being stored. So you should be able to scan all of these data assets, like and find out what all personal data is being stored there. So, for example, let me just check if I'm connected to our VPN. Allow me a moment, please. Okay. So this is a Lens application that we use for data discovery, and immediately I will take you to the data catalog. So in this data catalog, you can see all the various types of data sources that are there, and you can see all the various data categories that have been discovered in all of these data sources. So if I pick up any data source, I immediately see, what all fields are available in this, and I can keep drilling down and I can find the exact pathway like the exact column basically in which this data is available, and within the path I can find out how many instances also there are of that data. And I can also look at samples. So this is an optional config, but you can look at samples that are picked up for your review within that data. And once you have looked at the sample, you can confirm and publish it, and it is stored as a confirmed result. This is an optional process. Bringing the samples is also an optional process, but the end result is that you get a complete sort of high level view of your data sources. So I will not go into a lot of details, but here you can set up your scans and upload your credentials and do the scans. Some key factors about this application. Firstly, it is entirely on-prem, which means that it does not create any security vulnerabilities for you. It does not connect to the internet, and it is hosted entirely on your premises. It is fully configurable, which means that you can add any data sources to it. We have a lot of connectors, and for whatever data sources are required, we build connectors very regularly. And it is agentless, which means that in most cases, we don't need to deploy any agent within your other applications. This application can by itself scan all of those data sources just using the connectors. So this at the end of this process, as a simple takeaway, you find out what data is in what system, right? So we wanted to understand what data is stored in what system and what all activities are the systems used for, and what all purposes are they used for. So this is the first step, right? This gives you a visibility of what data is in what system. Then how do you stitch together the rest of this story? You do that using assessments, right? So assessments is nothing but a set of questions that are being triggered. uh, Assessment is nothing but a set of questions that are being triggered to business owners, department owners, product owners, application owners, different owners, right? So when you add an assessment, you can give the assessment a name. For example, if you want to understand your product, if you want to understand a specific business line, let's say micro loans, you can create an assessment for specific activities within that business line. Let's say you want to do an assessment of credit check, and you can so let's say you want to do a DPIA, you can create this assessment. Sorry about this. Um, Sorry about this error. We look at some assessments that are already created. So, for example, in this assessment, we see that this assessment is already triggered, and this is an assessment of the system, which is Razorpay. And now, when I look at the complete scope, I can see all the profiles and purposes and all the activities that is happening that is related to Razorpay, right? This can be created using our preliminary assessment. So you can trigger preliminary assessment, and you can ask questions like, what all data categories are being collected as part of this processing, what are the data principles that are involved, what all purposes are involved, etc. And as you find out more and more details in your assessment, you can create this complete scope, and you can keep creating these profiles, right, in the scope section. So let's say you find out that, okay, Razorpay is being used for, payments activity or for any activity. You can simply add the activity here, or I can also add from a selected list of activities. So whatever information you keep finding out, you can keep adding it here, and you can keep creating your data mapping over here. You can also trigger these assessments. So this is your preliminary assessment, which you may need to do in case of a DPIA. And then finally, you can trigger your main assessment. So in each of these main assessments, you are triggering a set of questions that are sent to different owners, to different responders, right? So as I said, it can be your product owners, it can be your business owners, it can be your department heads, and all these different types of owners. So I've done a preliminary assessment, and I want to go into a main assessment first. I will save this result. in the preliminary assessment, and then I will come back to the main assessment and trigger this assessment. Just 1 second. So here this link gets triggered to all of these different responders. You can also set responders for each question. And then, these responders provide their responses to this entire assessment, and they're able to submit these responses. And once these responses come to you, you can review the responses, right? So in some places, you will see that some risks are getting auto added. So we have built in automations so that you are automatically able to identify the risks. And now coming to the risks, you are able to see, get a high level view on each risk, create tasks to mitigate that risk, decide your stance on that risk. So you can, for this particular risk, I can go into risk scoring, and I can specify, okay, what risk score do I want to give. I can add a new risk, and I can say that, okay, what is the treatment that I want to do for this particular risk. So all of these steps can be identified over here, and your risk can be managed over here. So at the end of this assessment, what you get two things. First, you get a complete view of your risks, and you get a mitigation steps for those risks, and all of those can be tracked over here. Second, you see the complete scope of all of your activities, and based on this, you are able to create a data mapping. So with this, I'll just pause the demo. What Just to very quickly conclude what we covered, we looked at uh, okay, consent requires this sort of a data mapping to be done, but what goes into creating that data mapping? We looked at how you can use discovery and automatic classification, data discovery, personal data discovery and classification to discover and classify personal data across your internal systems in a safe way and in a scalable way. And once you have identified what all data is in what all systems, you can also trigger assessments to not only the system owners, but also your product owners, your department heads, your business owners, and ask them more context about the processing, such as what all activities are done and what all purposes the data is used for. Once you have all of this context together, you can create a data mapping, and this data mapping can directly be integrated in your consent and request flows. Right. So this is a very quick way to get started and achieve the uh, majority of DPDP compliance. There are, of course, smaller aspects that we didn't go into today because of the lack of time, but something that we can pick up later. What audit logs are required? I'm looking at questions very quickly. What audit logs are required for digital consent? Does the DPDP Act specifically state on maintaining audit logs? That's a great question. Thank you for that question. So I'll come back to the application. So the DPDP Act requires you to maintain detailed logs of consent. They should look like, they should have a timestamp when the consent was granted. On legality, on consent in, you're also able to get a digitally signed consent artifact that is the gold standard for storing consent logs. And this entire consent data can also be, you can download this record, and this record is also digitally signed by us, right? And for each request, you're also required to maintain logs. So these requests can be raised, and we maintain detailed logs of whatever is happening under these requests. So yeah, touching upon requests, I raised requests earlier from the legality website. This is an erasure request. So here you're able to trigger an erasure instruction to the CRM admin. This process can also be automated, and we also store verifications for each erasure. And once it is verified, it can be marked as completed. And even in access request, grievance requests also work very similar to this. You can also, in grievances, you can send responses to the end customer, the end user, the data principal. You can send them, you can ask them questions, ask them for documents, etc. And you can internally also coordinate on this. And all of these logs together are adequate. So you need a log for consents, you need a log for notice being shown, you need a log for the consent being updated, you need a log for request being resolved, you need logs for a bunch of these things. These list of things, and these should be verifiable, and they should hold up in front of the data protection code. I don't see any other questions. So over to you, Sangeeta. Um, we can take more questions or conclude this session.
Yeah, so many people would be having some smaller questions, like not so heavy questions like this. So even if you have a small questions like from the beginning, also very basic question also. So please don't hesitate to ask so that no, we can get even the other people in the audience will get clarity. So kindly go ahead and ask these questions, whatever questions you have.
Yes, please. I'll be happy to answer any questions. It'll also give me a sense
Thank,
of.
yeah, hi Pushkar, this is Santosh Srinivasan from Equifax. So I just your presentation was very wonderful, and I was very happy to see that you guys have developed a very uh, meaningful and a tool which is very easy to use, user friendly, which we can implement. We can license the tool and implement immediately. But I'm only worried about the cost because see. What the DPDP Act says is if we already have the data, personal data, we have to, within 6 months, we have to uh, take the consent fresh. Otherwise, we have to delete the data. So now, if we need to take consent, we have to send the messages or may through email or through this thing. Okay, so is there mechanism built in already in your thing? Because the tool what you showed us is for the fresh stuff, but for the existing data, because see, we as a it may be fintech or it may be a CAC or a bank, we already have data with us. Okay, so we have to live with that. So in order to make it compliant, we have to send the notice. So for that, have you provided in your tool?
You
You're
are
on
on.
mute, sir.
Sorry about that. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Firstly, thank you, Santosh, for your praise and also for asking this question. Very important question. So you mentioned, sending a one-time notice, and let me just come back here and open this profile. So here in the consent capture section, you can specify what sort of a profile this is, right? So you talked about the one-time notice, where for the current customers you have to send them a one-time notice. So if you send them a one-time notice, they will get a sort of a okay, not an accept option, just an okay option. So that means that you're sending them that one-time notice. The Section 5 requirement to for all your previous data that you have collected, you
Yeah.
need to send them a one-time notice. So that is available with us. Now you can send out these one-time notices in campaigns because basically it's your entire customer base. So the outreach to these customers will also have to be managed, right? So you can send out these one-time notices in you can either use our API, take the one-time notice and show it to a digital user. But most users in this audience would not be digital. A lot of users would not be digital users, which is why you can, run these campaigns where you're able to track the delivery status and the open rate of all of these one-time notices. In fact, if you just want to directly do this from the application, you can upload an Excel of all of your current customers. Of course, you'll have to do it in chunks, and then choose the contact mode. It can be email, SMS, WhatsApp, or whichever IVR, whichever contact mode you want to reach them on. And you can run the profile directly from the business application to send them a one-time notice as well. So, and those campaigns can also be managed in the business application.
Thank you for clarification. But see, as you rightly pointed, my entire population of my customers are not available on digital, or their email IDs are not available with us. Okay, maybe their phone number, I don't know the exact number of customers who have provided their phone number. Maybe around 90%. That's my wild guess. Let's take it hypothetically for 90% of customers we have phone number. So for email, customers who have provided email, it is easy. Okay, we will send. Okay, so for customers who have provided their phone number, your solution is we will do IVR. call. Okay. And but for the rest of the customers, say for example, 10 to 15 or 20% max, who don't have phone number or email, what to do? What is the solution you suggest?
Right.
Because
That's
all my friends sitting here are wondering what we'll do to those customers. Because I have to be 100% compliant. I cannot, there is no question of me partially complying with it, nor saying that, okay, I'll comply in the later down the line. Yeah.
absolutely, Santosh. And again, that's a very valid question that is in the minds of not just you, but a lot of BFSI leaders that we've been speaking to. I can give you very solution-oriented answers, which I can get into. But the real answer, if we just take a broader look at this, the real sense that we've been getting from regulators and leaders in top BFSI companies is that it's not about 100% compliance, right? What they want you to achieve is at least 80% compliance, at least do the best that you can, right? So thinking about specific solutions, it is a very common problem that phone numbers are not updated, common phone numbers are being used, addresses, credentials are not very, very clear. So you can't really send someone a registered post and acknowledge delivery of that registered post
It's
at
very
this scale.
expensive.
Yeah, exactly. It's very expensive. So you need to be able to reach out to as many percentage customers as you can. For the other customers, maybe you can consider something like notifications in a newspaper. Typically, for notice requirements in other laws, newspaper notifications or
But
community
that is
center
absent.
notifications.
That is absent in the DPDP Act, nor in the
Absolutely,
rules.
absolutely. It's
It's a
not there.
penumbra area where we don't know what
Yes,
to do. Okay, Act is silent.
absolutely.
We don't have clarity. We don't have law making authority giving clarity to us. That is where we are uh, right now.
Absolutely, Santosh. Yeah, I fully agree with you. And we have also, been asking these questions in informal circles. And the only sensible answer that we have gotten for this is that the ministry is also not expecting 100% compliance. They are expecting you to take as many steps as possible to achieve that compliance.
The
That's
last
when the,
question.
yeah,
Yeah, sorry, sir. Last question. So, because see, this sending notice to, I have 1 billion plus customers data in my database. So, if I send one at the rate of 30 rupees per speed post, 30 billion, I have to ask my management to keep it aside. It's not practical. So, from the cost effectiveness perspective, I'm not, I understand you cannot tell the exact cost of your tool. I know it's confidential, but for the benefit of all of us who are attending this, can you just give a ballpark number? So, not the exact commercials, I don't want, but how your license is structured. Is it user based or is it based on data? Or are you hosting it on SaaS server and you are providing SaaS license to us? Because consent manager, you can provide to 100 different entities like me, right? So how it is going to work, because on-prem, I heard you saying that this can sit on-prem, but I cannot manage the consent manager. You have to manage on behalf of me, right? I had to outsource it to you. The data fiduciary themselves cannot become consent manager. There is a bar. So from that perspective, how you have designed, I don't give me the commercials, sorry, I'm not expecting that, but how you have designed the licensing tool means you would have put a lot of thought behind it, how to commercialize it, right? So how can you share it with us so that we can contact you back, and we want your contact number at the end so that we can come back to you. Thank you.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, you will know, Santosh, that it's very difficult for me to answer this question directly. So I'm also flashing our QR. You can scan this QR if you want to reach out to us. But yeah, so the answer to this question depends a lot based on a lot of factors, such as the size of the organization, the deployment model, whether it's on-prem or whether it's SaaS, and a bunch of other factors as well. I cannot uh, give you a sense of, I mean, we can take this conversation offline, like we can connect, on a more private sort of forum, and we will be much more candid with you and we can, just figure this out together.
Definitely,
But
I'll reach
broad,
out to you. But you just tell us whether it is license, your licenses are user based or based on your commercial view, based on the data what we process, size of the customer what we process, or is it customer per customer base? Means, see, for example, when I do a licensing of my tool on the SaaS, we charge it on customer basis or per hit basis. So how it will be? Because we can guess how costly or how what may be the thing means cost, because we are also worried about the cost. This will involve huge cost. That is where we are coming from.
right. I think the answer, a specific answer to this, I will be able to share with you. We will be able to share with you in a meeting with you. But
Okay, sir.
the
We'll
general,
arrange a meeting with my management. No problem.
yes, absolutely. But the general approaches, that are available, of course, if the it's to host the infra and the work that goes into it. So in a SaaS infrastructure, your costs will be distributed across the various people who are using that infrastructure. But in an on-prem infrastructure, your infrastructure costs will be very high. So that is sort of one threshold that you can have in mind in terms of deciding your cost. That will it be easier to serve my customer. If you have a very, very high volume base, it might make sense for you to host that on your own infrastructure. But if you have a relatively smaller or even like a big size, but not a very big size customer base, then it might make sense to go for a SaaS-based approach. Of course, infosec requirements aside, strictly from like a costing point of view. And of course, when you get into SaaS, it the cost really depends on like how you're using it and the value that you are getting out of it. So that part of the question we will be happy to have a more private discussion and answer for you.
Sure, sure. I'll be eager to have discussion with it. Last question for the benefit of the entire attendees here. Have you thought about taking a ISO 27001 certification for this entire tool? Have you processed it,
We
or you are
have we
thinking
have
of?
a 27001
You
certification.
already have.
Legality,
Oh,
yeah,
great. That's great. That's great.
legality
Because
has
that's
a
one of the
27001.
requirements. That's the reason why I asked you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Pushkar. Thank you.
Thank you, Santosh. Thank you for your questions and information. And I look forward to speaking with you more.
Sure, sure. I'll call you.
थैंक यू फॉर दैट एंड रेस्ट ऑफ द ऑडियंस, आप हिंदी इंग्लिश मिला के भी क्वेश्चन पूछना चाहे तो पूछ सकते हैं, ऐसे नहीं है कोई स्ट्रिक्ट कि हम इंग्लिश में ही करेंगे. सो इफ यू हैव मतलब कोई भी डाउट आ रहा है, पुष्कल आराम से हिंदी में जवाब दे सकते हैं, हिंदी इंग्लिश मिला के. हम सभी कोई प्योर हिंदी तो बोलते नहीं कोई. सो प्लीज आस्क दोज क्वेश्चंस.
पुष्कर, हाय पुष्कर, रवि दिस साइड फ्रॉम सैटिन क्रेडिट केयर. तो
Hi,
मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है, क्लाइंट के कंसेंट को रिवोक करने का. बेसिकली हम लोग क्लाइंट से कंसेंट हर स्टेप पे लेते ही हैं. रिवोक में ये है कि हम जैसे लोन क्लोज होने के 5 साल तक डेटा, पीआई डेटा को हमको स्टोर करना पड़ता है एज पर गाइडलाइन. अब क्या हमें, क्लाइंट अगर ऐसा रिक्वेस्ट कर रही है डेटा डिलीट करने का या करने का, तो क्या हम उसके लॉक को भी मेंटेन करना पड़ेगा? कैसे उसको कैसे हैंडल कर रहे हो आप, जिसको हम नहीं
right. हाँ रवि, थैंक यू. तो इसमें जो सिंपल अप्रोच है वो ये है कि अगर आपका एक कोई भी रेगुलेटर से रेगुलेटरी रिक्वायरमेंट है टू रिटेन द डेटा, डेटा रिटेंशन का आपका अगर आरबीआई से सर्कुलर है कि केवाईसी डेटा रिटेन करना है, आपका आरबीआई से सर्कुलर है कि आपको क्रेडिट चेक डेटा रिटेन करना है, आरबीआई से सर्कुलर है लोन अग्रीमेंट आपको रिटेन करना है. अब कब तक रिटेन करना है वो सब कुछ लिखा हुआ है. केवाईसी आपको लोन अकाउंट क्लोजर के बाद एक टाइम पीरियड तक, 10 साल तक, 6 साल तक आपको उसे रिटेन करना है. तो वो आपको रिटेन करना ही पड़ेगा. उसमें यूज आपका जो कस्टमर है उसके कंसेंट इरेजर का कोई इम्पैक्ट नहीं है. तो आपको जहां पर कोई, अगर आप इसे ब्रॉडली देखो तो जहां पर भी आपकी कोई रिटेंशन रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं है, लीगल रिटेंशन, लीगल रिपोर्टिंग, रेगुलेटरी रिपोर्टिंग, जिस भी डेटा के लिए आपकी रेगुलेटरी रिपोर्टिंग रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं है, वहां पे आपको डिलीशन करना है. स्पेशली अगर वो डेटा आप थर्ड पार्टी के साथ शेयर करें तो आपको थर्ड पार्टी के साथ डिलीट कराना है, क्योंकि उसकी रिस्क ज्यादा हो जाती है. राइट. तो ब्रॉडली अप्रोच यही है कि जहां
पुष्कर,
पर
बेसिकली मेरा क्वेश्चन इसलिए था कि हमारे क्लाइंट को नहीं पता है कि हमारी क्या गाइडलाइंस, ठीक है. जैसे
हम्म,
5 साल हम डेटा रखना है, ये चीज़ें जो है. अब
हम्म,
प्रॉब्लम ये है कि क्लाइंट अगर वो लोन क्लोज होने के बाद अगर रेस कर रही है क्वेरी कि मेरा डेटा डिलीट कर दीजिए, तो
हम्म,
क्या उसको, तो मेरे को कैसे इन्फॉर्म करेंगे कि नहीं आपका डेटा एज पर रेगुलेटरी रिक्वायरमेंट हमें रखना है, और क्या उसकी जो रिक्वेस्ट की गई है उसका लॉग भी हमको सिस्टम में मेंटेन करना है कि नहीं करना है, ये चीज़ थोड़ा सा मैं जानना चाह रहा था।
जरूर। सो आपको उसको आप उसको आपका पहला क्वेश्चन था उसको मैं बता कैसे सकते हैं। तो आप उसे बता सकते हो इन द नोटिस जो आपको मैंने अभी दिखाया था इन द डेमो। आप उस नोटिस से उन्हें बता सकते हो अपने कस्टमर को कि आपकी डिफरेंट डिफरेंट जो भी रिटेंशन रिक्वायरमेंट्स है और डिफरेंट डिफरेंट डेटा वो क्या है। नोटिस के थ्रू बता सकते हो। आप एक प्राइवेसी पॉलिसी पब्लिश कर सकते हो। अगर इसके बावजूद आपको किसी कस्टमर का एक इरेजर रिक्वेस्ट आता है तो आप उन्हें उस इरेजर रिक्वेस्ट के रिस्पॉन्स में बता सकते हो कि आपका डेटा मेरे पास इन सिस्टम्स में है। इन सिस्टम्स में मैंने डिलीट कर दिया है। बाकी मेरे पास इन सिस्टम्स में रखा हुआ है क्योंकि मेरी रेगुलेटरी रिक्वायरमेंट है। और इन सब की लॉगिंग आपको हाँ करनी पड़ेगी अंडर द लॉ। आपको कंसेंट विड्रॉल की लॉगिंग रखनी पड़ेगी। आपको डिलीशन के लॉग रखने पड़ेंगे। और आपको क्या कहते हैं रिक्वेस्ट जो इरेजर रिक्वेस्ट आती है उसको आप कैसे ट्रीट करते हो उसके क्या एसएलएज है आपको उसके लॉग रखने।
थैंक यू पुष्कर, बस यही था। और एक पुष्कर एक चीज़ और बस बताइए, जैसे हमारा जो जनरली सारे कंसेंट जो कस्टमर से हम लेते हैं वो मेरा ओटीपी बेस्ड ही है, तो दैट इज द मतलब सफाइज आवर मतलब रिक्वायरमेंट ऑफ द डीपीडीपी ना?
नहीं, क्योंकि अभी जो आप कंसेंट लेते हो आप क्या लेते हो कि ये रही हमारी प्राइवेसी पॉलिसी। हम तुम्हारे डेटा के साथ एक दो तीन चार पाँच छह चीजें करेंगे और
हाँ
उसका कंसेंट ओटीपी से दे दो। राइट।
जी।
बट लॉ बोल रहा है कि फॉर ईच पर्पस आप जिस भी पर्पस के लिए डेटा यूज कर रहे हो मान लो आप एक तो अकाउंट खोलने के लिए प्रोफाइल क्रिएशन इसके लिए आप डेटा यूज कर रहे हो।
हम्म
आप दूसरा डेटा में भी उसको केवाईसी के लिए यूज कर रहे हो। राइट।
हम्म
आप तीसरा रीजन में भी क्रेडिट चेक के लिए यूज कर रहे हो। तो आपको ये डिटेल्स एटलीस्ट ब्रॉडली कस्टमर को बतानी पड़ेंगी। और उन डिटेल्स के अगेंस्ट जहां जहां पे मैंडेटरी है चलो ठीक है केवाईसी एंड ऑल मैंडेटरी है क्योंकि आपको ऑनबोर्डिंग के लिए केवाईसी क्रेडिट चेक ये सब चाहिए। बट जहां जहां पे ऑप्शनल है जैसे मार्केटिंग प्रमोशन क्रॉस सेलिंग अपसेलिंग आप अगर साथ में कोई इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी बेच रहे हो या फिर ऐसा कुछ तो वहां पर आपको उसका ऑप्ट इन कंसेंट लेना पड़ेगा। इसका ये मतलब है कि आप एक ही ओटीपी से हर चीज का कंसेंट जो पूरी छह की छह चीजें थी आठ चीजें थी दस चीजें थी उसका कंसेंट नहीं ले सकते। आपको स्पेसिफिक कंसेंट फॉर स्पेसिफिक पर्पस लेना पड़ेगा। तो पर्पस कैन बी अकाउंट ओपनिंग पर्पस कैन बी मार्केटिंग पर्पस कैन बी ऑफर्स राइट पर्पस कैन बी एडिशनल इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी समथिंग लाइक
ओके ओके, थैंक यू थैंक यू थैंक यू पुष्कर।
दैट। Please share the guidelines and step-by-step procedure to be followed by MFI along with commercials. Yeah, we can share like we can take understand your requirements and share commercials. But for that, you can scan the QR, reach out to us, or we will just scan the QR and we'll be able to reach out to you. Um, Guidelines, step-by-step guidelines for NBFC. The slides that I've shown in the presentation today, we'll be happy to share that. That should get you a good idea. If you want to go in more detail, then please, you can, we set up a session with us and we are happy to get into more details with you.
We'll share the PPT after this webinar. So please be assured that you will get that along with the minutes and whatever FAQ I can generate. I also will be sharing that with you. No issue about that. किसी और को पूछना है क्या? Any other question? Yes, no. Okay. For the time being, I think everybody is satisfied with your explanation, Pushkar. So thank you for that. I now invite Gigi sir to make the concluding remark. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Pushkalji, for your very elaborate and very nice presentation of the whole thing. I'm sure many of you must have, many of you must have benefited by this presentation, and maybe some people may not have been entirely, I mean, absorb the whole thing because some basic knowledge also is required for this. So probably we'll also do some more programs in the future. we will start with some basics of this DPDP also, so that people should understand what are the things to be taken care of while dealing with the private data. Because you are basically talking about a step ahead of it. The consent and those things are a little ahead of the basic parts. Probably we need to look at that also one more time. Let's close here for the time being. Maybe Sangeeta, we can organize one or two more such webinars. We can also have, because some of the people would like to know the basic part of the whole the new law also. So that also we can take care of. So thank you so much, and thank you, Pushkalji, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you, all of you, for being here. I find almost all the people who have joined the webinar have been there till the end of this session, which shows the importance and how it was beneficial to them. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. We'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.